Playing
So,
my
thank you so
slides.
much for being here, Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
This is Michelle Danyluk. She is a food safety specialist at the University of Florida. She is somebody that Wes and I have been lucky enough to spend a lot of time with on different grant projects and some national work that we do to help farmers prepare for FSMA. And so Michelle is an expert at when it comes to post-harvest sanitation. She's somebody that we look to for resources, and we text her a lot with lots of questions. So we really appreciate that she took time today to be able to talk to you all about sanitation programs. And you have your slides, Michelle, or you need us to load them up?
I have them, but I do not have a share screen option. Oh, I do have a
Michael,
share.
can you?
No, I'm good. I got it.
All right. All right, and I'll leave it to you.
You are seeing my screen now, yes?
Yep, looks good.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right. So thanks to Meredith and Wes and Jennifer for asking me here to be here with you guys all today. Meredith tells me you're all pretty far into your food safety journey. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about verifying your cleaning and sanitation programs and a little bit of also why you might want to do this or why you should be doing this. So can I just either by a show of hands in the reaction or by a chat, how many of you folks are doing some sort of verification of your cleaning and sanitation program right now? All right, I see a couple hands sort of wave at me. Sounds good. I've got the chat open, so if you guys have questions, go ahead and look in the chat or go ahead and type them in the chat, or if possible, go ahead and interrupt me and ask the questions because I want to do this a bit as a discussion as we go along. So let's start our discussion about verifying your cleaning and sanitizing programs are effective. And I want to sort of start this off by talking about master sanitation schedules. And I think that if if it is the first time you're hearing about a master sanitation schedule or it's not something you have in place, I want you guys to really consider coming up with this sort of as you're moving forward. And what it is it's a way to provide written guidance to ensure that there's effective cleaning and sanitation for the routine cleaning, sort of that cleaning you're doing on a daily basis, for any deep cleaning you might be doing if you go in at some point in the middle of your season and do a deep cleaning. And if you do end of season or beginning of season activities, sort of putting these all together in some sort of a master sanitation schedule really takes your sanitation program to sort of the next level. And then, of course, I've just got here a list of all the different things that it should include, who's going to do the things, what are they going to do, when they're going to do it, and then how they're going to do it. And so again, it really is something where you can put all the frequencies together into this one document to talk about how you're going to do it. And you can do it a couple of different ways. In this case, right, for example, we're talking about a specific cooler. And in this cooler, we're going to clean the evaporators quarterly. We're going to clean the lights once a season, the ceiling once a season, right? Racks and walls quarterly, dock plates and docks weekly, roll-up doors weekly, or speed doors weekly, roll-up door monthly, floors daily or weekly, depending on where they are, and then similar with sort of drains. So again, looking at your space and really creating this master sanitation schedule all around it. And that sort of can happen in a format like this. I've also seen it happen in a format like this. So this is looking at a cooling tube in a leafy green operation, and they say they're going to do an alkaline wash and quat sanitize, so that's their daily cleaning. And then once a week they're going to go in and change up that sanitizer and do a PAA sanitizer. And then they're going to do a more intense Sterilex multi-step wash and sanitize monthly, right? And then control panel wipe down, that's going to happen weekly with alcohol. And then they're going to do verification micro sampling sort of at season change. And I have verification highlighted here because that's what the bulk of my talk is going to talk about later. But again, if you don't have sort of this idea of a master sanitation schedule in place, identifying when you're going to do your verification activities, you're probably putting the cart ahead of the horse. So you do at this point need to have sort of this larger idea of the sanitation schedule set up before we start talking about verification activities. Ditto with our standard operating procedures, right? I think all our audit schemes call for a number of SOPs. And so having those SOPs and those standard records are really key, right? We do use them a lot, and we see them required by audit schemes very, very frequently. Does anybody in the room, in the audience, have a favorite SOP that your audit scheme asks you for? Anybody want to identify what your favorite SOP your audits might ask you for is?
Crickets.
Crickets. We have an auditing body that a lot of our growers use here in Florida where I am, where they need to have an SOP on how to write an SOP. And that one always makes me laugh. And I also laugh at their SOP on how to change an SOP. Right, sometimes the audit schemes take these SOPs to an extreme, but in general, they are very, very useful in your cleaning and sanitation programs. And again, very much a prerequisite before we start talking about verification, right? And then again, hopefully this looks familiar to you, but again, right, we're talking about all the data you need, all the information you need in your SOP. And I'm going to spend a lot of time later on in the talk talking about corrective action, verification, and corrections. But these are all things hopefully that look very familiar to you. This is just another way of looking at it, right? Again, the who, what, when, where, and how of our SOPs, or in this case, we were calling them SSOPs, our standard sanitation operating procedures. And again, what you'll see is verification very much falls in this sort of last box here under the how, which really means that all these other pieces need to be in place before we start talking about verifying our cleaning and sanitation operations. All right, and then right, just another thing to sort of look at or think about as you're developing your SOPs or evaluating them once again, right? How much time do we really have to do this? How much water will be used? And is there adequate water pressure and volume? Detergents and chemicals, their concentrations. Can the employee safely complete the task, right? And then who reviews it and what do they look at? And so as I've sort of seen an evolution in SOPs in our industry here in Florida, these are sort of where our SOPs sort of have moved to. And so this is an SOP talking specifically about documenting details for cleaning and sanitation procedures just for belt conveyors and elevators in this operation. And so again, right, purpose is very clearly laid out. What I really like in this SOP is that they do have these photos, right? Specifically calling out, making really clear to the person who's doing the cleaning or the person they're training on doing the cleaning, what we mean when we're talking about different areas. I got another, just again, some more pictures, right? These are the areas we want you to pay attention to. This is what we mean when we say these different things. So including photos in your SOPs is something that I've seen gain a lot of popularity in the last little bit, and I would encourage you guys to consider that in your SOPs as well. You know, often we think writing an SOP is very, very easy. If we were in person together, I would have had you guys do a group activity where I handed out a bunch of different SOPs written at different levels of detail. The SOPs would have been written for how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, assuming nobody in the room was allergic to peanuts. And I would have given you all different tools. Some of you would have had the tools you needed to complete the SOP. Others of you wouldn't have had the tools to complete the SOP. I like to use that as a teaching example because something like making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right, should be very, very easy. But with a poorly written SOP, or without peanut butter, or without jelly, or without bread, or without a knife, it becomes a lot more complicated. And I think it's a great activity just to show the importance of having really well-written and detailed SOPs, and also having enough time and all the details to accomplish the SOP as written. So would encourage you to go back into those SOPs that I know you've got written for your audits, and take a look at them and really think about it. Think about making sure that it's clear to everyone exactly what you ask them to do. And again, adding these pictures is a great way to really help clarify that. Again, just more information in there, right? What personal protective equipment we expect everybody to have, what cleaning utensils and tools we expect everybody to have, right? And again, sort of all the information they need, and then very detailed procedures written exactly how you want this process to have. Again here, right, I like the detail around contact time of 10 minutes, right? Do not allow the detergent to dry. And it actually says that twice, right? Do not allow the detergent to dry. So it kind of makes you think that perhaps this company had a problem before where that detergent did dry, and they had a really hard time getting the residual off of the belts. But really where we're going with this as I move forward is, right, tie the SOP or SSOP back to that master sanitation schedule, and then again identify how you're going to verify this. And so in this case, this SOP is verified by an inspection, ATP monitoring, and with the environmental monitoring program. So we'll talk in a little bit more detail about all of these things. I do just have the end of another SOP coming up here, where it talks about the different chemicals that they said and the dilutions for use, right? So just the end of that SOP there. So why am I starting with sanitation schedules and SOPs? Again, it's because unless you've got all of this set up, we really can't start talking about verification, right? Until we know what sort of surfaces we've got, what sort of procedures we've got, we can't start talking about verifying that they're working properly. So again, these are all sort of prerequisites that you have in an established food safety program that we need before we start getting into verification of them. So just a few photos of some of some complicated surfaces we see in packing houses or in post-harvest for cleaning and sanitizing. This first one here is from Betsy Bin at Cornell University, right? You guys can all see that there is, I can't actually tell if it's plastic or cardboard, but it has been taped on to the belt to help put the product together. And then I'll share this next one. This is an operation that I visited almost a decade ago now, that it was time for them to start talking about verification of their cleaning and sanitizing program. So they brought me to see their brush rollers at the line they'd just taken out of storage. They just set up taking out of storage, and they'd cleaned and sanitized it a couple days before in preparation to start the sealing. And when I got there, I hope you guys can all see what's going on. The brush roller line was actually sprouting. So you can see that something's actually coming and growing out of all the brushes. I don't know what kind of a plant it is, but it was a cantaloupe washing line, and something's growing out of it. What I will say to you is this: a way to know that your cleaning and sanitation was not effective is if your line is sprouting like this, right? Your program's not working the way you think it should have. So if you see this not working the way it should have. But with that, let's move on. And I want to start by talking about definitions, because when we talk in food safety, there's two different words that we often hear either together, and because they both start with V, they tend to get confused with each other, right? So, and those two words are validation and verification. So validation, in the simplest way of thinking about it, is, are you doing the right thing? Is my cleaning and sanitizing program the right program for me to be using? We're not talking about validation here, right? That's a whole different discussion where it comes down to choosing the right chemicals, scrubbing appropriately. That's not what we're talking about here. We're assuming that we all know that we're doing the right thing in our cleaning and sanitation programs. What we're talking about here is verification, right? And this is asking ourselves the question of, is the system being implemented according to the plan? So our validation gave us this great plan of what we're supposed to be doing. We've written all these great SOPs. We've got a master sanitation schedule. We know what we're supposed to be doing. Now let's ask ourselves the question, how do we prove every time we do cleaning and sanitation that we're doing what we said we're going to do? So how do we make sure that we're implementing the plan as we've laid it out? And that's what we're going to spend the next amount of time for my talk talking about. All right, so we're really focused on verification here. We've assumed that everything else up front is all in place, and so we can now work at verification. Now, the purpose, right, like I said, of our verification plan is very much to verify that that our cleaning and sanitation procedures are working the way we said they'd be working, right? And the reason that we do that is to ensure that our equipment, our facility is not contaminating the product that we have there. And at the end, if I still have time, I've got a bunch of slides that talk about what happens if your verification goes wrong and the consequences of that. We'll see if we get to them or not, but know that verification is very much there to ensure our cleaning and sanitation program is working the way it should be, and we have a microbiologically clean environment. That environment that we've got is not feeding into the contamination. So the product that we bring in, that we've put all this effort into keeping not contaminated in the field, is not then being contaminated by something we've got in our packing house. All right. And we really, right, again, are trying to show that the program, our cleaning and sanitation programs, are effective. All right. It is not a requirement of the produce safety rule. So nowhere in any of the federal regulations does it say you have to verify your cleaning and sanitation program. But it is quite frequently included in some audit schemes or by different buyers. And there are really two types of verification we're going to talk to, because we often, again, right, talk about cleaning and sanitation like it's this one program, but there is a cleaning step, and then after you get your clean surface, there is a sanitizing step, right? Because we know we can't sanitize a dirty surface. And so what we're going to talk about now is really the difference between verifying our cleaning step versus verifying our sanitation step, because those two verification processes can look or are pretty different, both in terms of the frequency we may want to be doing them, and in terms of the cost to do the two different things. All right, so we'll start by talking about verifying our cleaning, and then we're going to talk about verifying our sanitation programs. All right, so we'll start with cleaning. All right, and so this verification of cleaning should be done after cleaning, but before sanitizing. All right. And it very much is, as I look at it, it's a go, no go step, right? So once you're done cleaning an item, and you followed all your cleaning SOPs, you do this cleaning verification, and that's the decision of whether you move on to sanitizing or go back and do some additional cleaning. All right, so highlighted here in orange is the terminology visibly clean. So again, cleaning and sanitation verification, not a requirement of the produce safety rule, but where we do see it being a requirement sort of in FSMA regulations, happens in the preventive control rule for human foods. And so that's the manufactured food recommendation, and the specific language in preventive controls when they talk about cleaning and sanitation verification is to get the area back to visibly clean. All right, and so the very minimum standard that you guys should be doing for your verification of cleaning is, did I get the surface to visibly clean? All right. And visibly clean in this case means that there's no plant material or other debris remaining on the line. And I think in packing, There are some really difficult to clean and sanitize surfaces. And so I work frequently with the citrus industry here in Florida. And did they ever have a problem with rollers coming off of a waxer? Right, the wax gets on the equipment, and the debris of the wax on the equipment is very, very difficult to take off unless you've got the correct detergent to do that. But those sort of wax covered lines are something where I might say, you really haven't gotten it back to visibly clean. Or if you think about some of the white PVC rollers that I also see quite frequently, right? Sometimes they start to dull, sometimes they start to get buildup on them. Are they back to visibly clean? And really hitting that visibly clean point should be our goal. But I would say no plant material on there is a pretty good goal. I have walked into my fair share of operations where after the cleaning and sanitizing has happened, you sort of pick up a belt or you look in a corner and you can still see, different types of plant debris in the operation. One of the most difficult, challenging ones I've ever seen was a radish operation. Those radishes seem to get themselves jammed into just about everywhere. So getting them off of the line before you did cleaning and sanitation was critical. So again, if we're verifying cleaning, visibly clean is our minimum target we should go to. Records should be kept that you have hit that visibly clean point before you move on into your sanitation. Now, if we want to take it a step beyond just hitting visibly clean, then typically for cleaning verification, we do something called ATP testing. Is anybody in the Zoom room doing ATP testing? They want to put themselves forward. All right, this is something that we see in some, but not all industries out there. Certainly in operations where they've been associated with a recall or an outbreak before, in commodities that have been targeted by FDA before, we're starting to see this come more. It really is sort of our simplest verification test for cleaning and sanitizing programs. And what it is testing is something called ATP, which stands for adenosine triphosphate. So if you can remember back to your high school biology days, and I know for people like me, it's been a while, although perhaps not as long as for Wes out there. But ATP is the powerhouse of cells. It is it's how all cells, all electrical impulses in our bodies really move. It's this key point of the energy process in all living things. So if we can find ATP on a surface, it means that there is some sort of residual from something alive on that surface. Now that thing that was alive could be bacteria, it could be parasites, it could be plant debris, it could be animal debris, it could be insect debris, could be human skin cells even, right? ATP is found in all living things. And so our goal with our ATP testing is, right, again, to check cleaning to make sure that we've moved all or as many as we can, do as much filth as we can from a surface. And it's measured in real time, right? And so real time here really means less than 2 minutes. When you have an ATP test, it can be very, very fast. So it can give you a decision to go or no go, right? So if I swab a surface and it doesn't hit my ATP threshold, I'll know immediately so that I can make the decision to go back and re-clean or know that I have cleaned this and it's okay. And it gives me that real-time measurement. All right, so this next purpose here says, if a surface is clean, ATP levels should be low. Now, the difficult thing with ATP is that what low means is not always the same. So you need to understand on each different surface in your operation, low will mean a different thing. So when I work with somebody who's doing a ready-to-eat food in an enclosed facility that's going onto the marketplace, and especially if it's going into something like baby food, right? I might say their ATP levels should be below a number of 50. or be below a number of 5 even. They should be really, really low. I'm working on a project right now where I'm working with leafy green harvesters, right? So big harvesting equipment that's cleaned and sanitized out in the field. And we, having no idea what a low level should be, we sort of set a threshold at 20,000, right? So that level of low is going to be really dependent on you getting in place some measurements to know what clean is and how good your facility is, and again what your challenges of specific dirt types are. That 20,000 number works really well for some of the farms I'm working with the really sandy soil type. But when we start getting onto farms that have a much more muck soil type, a higher organic soil, we really are struggling to get anywhere near to 20,000. So again, levels should be low, but there's no set limit of what those levels should be. So what is ATP testing? And what it is in its most simplest form is, again, looking for the presence of ATP, which is that molecule that powers all living cells. And the way we do it is actually pretty cool. And we do it using the enzyme from a firefly butt that makes that firefly light up at the end. So what they've done is they've sort of are creating a bunch of that enzyme, luciferase, that lights up a firefly, but when ATP is present. And what they've done is they say, okay, when you put your swab in the solution of luciferase, if there's an ATP there, it will cause the luciferase to light up the solution. And then you get this large amount of light being shown, and that light is read by something called an ATP meter. So in the bottom right-hand corner here, right, this is one example of an ATP meter that exists out there. There are two main companies that produce ATP meters out there. One is called Hygiena and one is called Charm. Those individual ATP tests cost on the average $1 or $2 per individual test, but you do have to purchase these meters in advance. Meters can range from anywhere from, I think, about $1,200 up to just under $5,000, depending on the company you use and the model design you get. The most complex meters that I've seen out there, the ones that are closer to $5,000, connect to your internet and allow for programming, and it takes those results and feeds them into a program in real time, so that if somebody else is doing your cleaning and sanitation for you, you can actually go in and double check in real time what their measurements are. Probably more than most of you guys need. The simpler meters that are closer to $1,000 are really very effective. And so that sort of is where and what these meters look like. Limitation of ATP is that it really doesn't talk about microbial load or presence of pathogens or anything for food safety beyond saying this surface is clean because we've removed everything, all the living cells, or we've reduced all the living cells or living debris on this surface. Again, right here, I show this sort of scale of what is safe or not safe. And again, in most manufactured facilities, we're talking about levels like this. And then, like I said, right, we're up at 20,000, and here it's saying 1,000 is extreme risk when we're out in the field. So if you have a packing house that is not completely enclosed, we're probably, sort of going to have to figure out for your packing house what the right target levels should be. But in this range of 100 to 1,000 is where I see a lot of packing houses falling into for their ATP reading. But again, the real advantage of this test, right, is that it's performed after cleaning and before sanitation, and you've got a set number, a clear line in the sand that either says I'm going to continue or I'm going to not continue, right? This is my go, no go point, my pass fail point, and I'm going to go, it's going to trigger me going back and cleaning more as necessary. I will point out here that there are failures that are associated without enough rinsing. So the detergent residuals, depending on the type of your detergent you're using, can interact significantly with the ATP meters. So if you're in an operation where you're starting to use ATP and you have a bunch of failures, one of the things you can look at is have I rinsed all the residuals off my surface properly? All right. We typically want to see ATP used on our food contact surfaces. So we're going to target like our zone 1, right? Our food contact surfaces, we're going to target those. We should target both the hard to reach areas and the hard to clean areas, as well as those flat, smooth, easy to clean areas. And then, like I said before, right, establish what our go, no go, or our pass point is based on the sampling site. All sampling sites are not going to have that same level of passing, as I mentioned several times already. The easy to clean surfaces, we're going to look for those really low numbers, whereas some of our harder to clean or areas with poor sanitary design or absorbent surfaces, we're going to have higher criteria between the two. All right. And so that's sort of how we set up ATP testing in our facility. How effective is it? How to effectively use it? You want to use it frequently, right? This is a tool that you want to use after each time you clean and sanitize. So what we are encouraging folks to do, and what we are starting to see people to do in our packing houses here is they're actually training the person that's doing the cleaning and sanitizing to use this ATP tool. So they know after I'm done with my cleaning, I have to use this tool. I have to get a certain ATP reading before I move on to do my sanitation. Can also use it to really identify problem areas in your facility, right? Where am I seeing problems? Where do I get really high ATP readings? How do I make my cleaning program better here to address the area, right? And that really gets into this next one, where it's really designing our cleaning procedures to reduce the areas where we're finding high ATP. And again, because that meter is in real time, we can test that almost continuously, again, in real time. All right. And so do I need to have a longer pre-rinse? Do I need to have more scrubbing? Do I need a different chemical concentration? Or do I really need to look at changing the type of equipment I've got here because I just can't get those counts lower? ATP can give us the data to help make these decisions in a data-driven area. Now, I say, do I need to increase my chemical concentrations? Do I need to decrease my chemical concentrations here as well, right? Am I using more detergent than I need? Am I always having trouble rinsing it off the line? It really can give you a lot of information about how effective your cleaning program is to really help you dial it in and fine tune it to make it efficient. All right, so is ATP right for me? There are advantages to it, right? It's one of the easier tests we have to use. It's really quick to do, happens in real time, and like I said, it's relatively cost expensive. We're talking a couple of dollars for every swab, which will differ from what I'm going to talk about when I talk about more of our sanitation verification. Disadvantages, right, is that there's little correlation with our microbial load, and that our detergents really can interfere with this, right? I've got try this out in the break. We're not in person, so we're not having a breakout. If we were, I would have brought the 2 types of ATP meters, a bunch of swabs with me so that you guys could try them all out and see their efficiency. I will say that when you feel like your sanitation program is in a good place, ATP is very much your next step in your food safety progression. We see it used all across the food industry. And like I said, seeing it used more and more frequently in packing houses, and even starting to see it being used on some harvesters and harvesting equipment after cleaning and sanitation. So if I put on my prediction hat for the future, I would not be surprised if this is something that a lot of audit schemes do start to ask for. And I would encourage you to spend some time with Wes and Meredith and Jen, trying it out and looking at it, because I do think that it can be a really valuable tool to help folks really, like I said, fine tune their programs. All right. I'm going to go on now to what happens if we don't pass, right? So again, I said visibly clean and no plant material. What happens if we don't pass our ATP, or if we've got plant debris left on our line? So if we hit that go, no go point and are like, nope, you can't go, you got to go back and clean. This is a terminology point. If plant debris remains, corrections should occur. All right. Again, taking ourselves out of the produce safety rule and looking into those manufactured foods rules under FSMA. One of the things they've done that I really like is they've differentiated between actions called corrective actions and actions called corrections. All right. And the way they do that is they say, if you have product implicated, then you need to take a corrective action. But if you found a problem before any product's been implicated, then you can just do a correction, and it triggers less of an extent of more record keeping associated with it. And so one of the things I really like about ATP monitoring is that you're going to check after you're clean, before you're sanitized, and use it as a decision to move forward or not move forward. And by doing that, you're making a correction, right? You haven't run any subsequent product down that line. You're correcting the problem before you run any more product down the line, so that the next lot of a product you bring in to pack in your facility will not be implicated because you've done that correction in real time. So that probably sounded really complicated to you, but there's a real reason why doing a correction is way better than doing a corrective action. And that has to do with recalling product if there is a problem, and establishing something called a clean break, right? A clean break in production is when we can show that I've come in and I've done a cleaning and sanitation that is effective, so that if I have to recall something, any product I ran subsequently will not have to be recalled, because I took the steps necessary to make sure that any contamination that may have been on the line was controlled before I ran my next lot of product. All right. And that's where this term correction becomes so important, because if we can do the correction based on an ATP reading in real time, then we don't have to do a corrective action to recall subsequent product should something go wrong. So I hope that was clear to everyone, but that sort of is the nuance that we're talking about here. And using an ATP meter really allows you to do a correction instead of having to trigger a corrective action where you've got product implicated. All right. And then I'll just say here, sort of really looking at what should be included in a correction. Should include both long and short-term activities, right? So you're going to re-clean, you're going to, if necessary, retrain. You might have to put in a new policy. You might have to make repairs or replace equipment or tools as necessary, or even change your product. But again, doing this correction is putting you much more proactively in charge of what's going to happen if something goes wrong. And it's a lot easier to do than doing some sort of a corrective action afterwards. All right. I'm going to transition now into verification of sanitation programs. So we've got all our prerequisites in place with our SOPs and our sanitation schedules. We've got our cleaning done. We've verified our cleaning, at least by saying visibly clean, if not by saying we've hit some sort of a threshold on something like an ATP meter. We're moving on to verification of sanitation. And this is done through something called an environmental monitoring program, where you actually go in and swab surfaces and test for microorganisms. Now, I have about 30 minutes, just under 25 minutes left, maybe just 20 minutes left to talk with you all about environmental monitoring. There's not enough time for me to cover everything we want to cover in environmental monitoring. So Meredith talked when she introduced me about programs we've worked on together, and this is a grant that I have with Wes and Meredith called Contact, and we have a 5-hour online self-paced program that is all about designing an EMP for your operation, and even goes into more detail on the prerequisite programs I just talked about. It's available for $15, and when you complete the course, you get a certificate at the end of it. This is where you can find information about the course. I thought it launched Friday. I found out today when I followed my QR code that I made last week that it actually doesn't launch until the 12th. So you're getting this information ahead of time, but know that if this is something that you're thinking of doing, this is a very much foundations in environmental monitoring course, a course for beginners, launching online for $15 a person, which essentially covers your certificate and mailing fees when you complete the course. Would encourage you to take some time to look at this. It's really got some great information in it, and is about 5 times longer than I'm talking to you here for today. I'll make sure Meredith has all this information when it officially launches, and when I don't confuse myself and launch it 7 days in advance of when the plan was to launch it. But when we start talking about environmental monitoring and verifying sanitation procedures, what we mean is going out into the environment and testing for different types of microorganisms. And so typically we would start that by testing for things like indicator organisms. How many indicator organisms do I have on my surface before or after, and typically after I clean and sanitize? If you when we would start setting this up, typically we'd test before a clean and then after a clean, and we'd see what sort of reductions you can get. If you are seeing increases and not reductions in your micro counts after your cleaning, no matter what your ATP step says, your cleaning is not effective. Now, do we see this? For sure, we've seen it before, especially in situations where we are using a lot of high pressure in our cleaning and sanitation programs, and maybe are in a situation where we've got potential from ricochet. We can see increased counts even after our cleaning programs. And if that's what you're seeing, then you've just effectively wasted all the money and time you put into cleaning. But we would start doing that with things called indicator organisms. And so examples of these are things like our aerobic plate count or our total plate count that just give us an idea of the total number of bacteria on a surface. We can do it with something like coliforms. Coliforms are a bacteria that's normally on the surface of fresh fruits and vegetables, so we know that those coliforms would be associated with cleaning any microbes that came from our fresh fruits and vegetables. We can do it with generic E. coli, similar to what we would do in water testing. This is to look for potential fecal contamination. And we can do it with Listeria species. Listeria, unlike E. coli that's fecally associated, Listeria is a bacterial species that can live in the environment. And by living in the environment, it can often find itself or establish itself on food contact surfaces, in food equipment, even in food manufacturing facilities. And so what we want to do when we're looking at Listeria is really prevent it from getting established in our facilities, and looking for it would be the way to do that. You can also do environmental monitoring testing for pathogens. All right. I really want to highlight this point right down here at the bottom. Do not do this unless you are ready to find it on your line and all the implications that would cause. All right. Examples of things that we can look for in pathogen environmental monitoring: Listeria monocytogenes and Salmonella. Have I ever recommended this in a facility? Absolutely, when they've had reoccurring problems with one of these two different organisms. What I would say to people typically is that if you are a wet facility, so if there's a lot of water in your facility, if there's a lot of moisture in your facility, if there's a lot of condensate in your facility, Listeria monocytogenes would be the pathogen you're targeting. If you are a dry operation or have dry parts of your operation where you do your best to keep water off the line, then Salmonella would typically be the organism you're looking for. But again, these pathogens, I should have put a big X over it. This is not where you want to start your environmental monitoring program. You want to start here over on your indicator side, and you typically want to start with something like an aerobic plate count or a coliform, because it is the least risky to you in terms of what you test for, right? The reactions you have to getting different results with these sort of microorganisms are much, much less than the reaction you'd have to have if you found Listeria or Salmonella in your facilities. So we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. All right. There's aerobic plate count. This is typically our entry point into our environmental monitoring programs. This is where I'm going to encourage you guys to start. If you start swabbing for, if you are starting up an environmental monitoring program in your facilities. So start it up, using it everywhere in your facility, and then moving forward as you sort of evolve an environmental monitoring plan, you would continue to use aerobic plate count on a food contact surface. All right. And it's not a measure of any pathogen. It's just a measure of the total microbial load on the surface, but it tends to be very, very useful, because what you will be able to see is, where are my surfaces where I have a high microbial load? Because on those surfaces where I do have a high microbial load, those are the surfaces where I'm likely getting transfer of microorganisms onto my crop. And those are the areas where I'm either not cleaning well enough, or they're really tricky to clean surfaces, right? And so when you do find, or if you do find higher counts, you can develop new cleaning and sanitation methods. You can swab more frequently. You can swab at adjacent locations. You can really try to target in why the program is operating the way, why that program is operating that way. All right. You can update or change your SOPs, and you can see how that would decrease these aerobic plate count numbers. But they really allow you to see, where are your high micro areas in your facility. And this is important for foodborne pathogens, but this is also important for different spoilage organisms and plant diseases in your facility, those post-harvest spoilage organisms, because they can also be cross-contaminating from those high points. So APC, if you're going to start in environmental monitoring, is where we recommend you would start. And if we look here in our different zones, this is where we would suggest you sort of look at sampling as you set something up. So in our zones 1 and 2, those are our food contact surfaces. We're going to do ATP on there, right, for our clean go, no go point. We're going to recommend testing for indicators, things like APC, on all our different zones. And then again, we're only going to recommend pathogen sampling if there's a reason to, right? Adjustments need to be made based on your program, based on your results, as you learn more about your cleaning and sanitation based on this verification program. And then I'll just point out here again, right? Please talk to us or someone before you start doing environmental monitoring for pathogens. Do not use it as your jump off point. So what environmental monitoring looks like, there's different types of tools you can get. There are swabs, which essentially look like little Q-tips, a bunch of different commercial varieties available. And they are great to get into small nooks and crevices of equipment, but they really can only sample a small area. And you can only apply minimal pressure with them, because you do end up cracking or breaking the swab in half, which nobody ever wants. The other thing that we frequently see are sponges, and these are older photos of sponges. These yellow sponges have typically been replaced now by a white sponge out there, because these yellow sponges on some of the rougher surfaces actually will start to break down, and you'll get a yellow sponge residual all over there. They are a bunch of commercial options, again, available, and they allow you to sort of swab a larger area, allow you to put a lot more pressure in on that swab as you're taking it. Can't get into those same little nooks and crannies that you could with the Q-tip based swab. And then there's sort of this intermediate approach. We call this a spongesicle, sort of playing on a like popsicle or creamsicle, but it's a sponge on a stick, and these can be pretty useful as well. But those are the different tools or types of tools that are available. How do you decide where to select? Again, these are the questions you're going to want to ask yourself when you're thinking about where to start sampling in your environmental monitoring. So first of all, what is the purpose of the sampling? Are we looking just for general sanitation verification, or are we going into more detail and looking for a problem we think we've got in our operation? All right, think like the enemy, and in this case, the enemy is bacteria, right? Where are they going to potentially be able to grow? Where are they forming biofilms that you guys have heard about before? Where on my product process line does the environment pose the greatest risk to the product? All right, probably that happens closer to the packing side than closer to when you're dumping the product onto the line. All right, what features of my equipment allow for niche development, right? Where are those nooks and crannies that I'm likely to see biofilm growth? Um, where are cleaning and sanitation efforts compromised? Where do I struggle cleaning and sanitation? You would want to select something like that. And then what practices, right, increase risk? Where are my high care areas? What do I really need to look at? So examples that we would typically look at in a zone 1 example would be something like a hopper or a cone, conveyors, and again, a bunch of different types of conveyors out there. Rollers, brush rollers in general tend to be difficult. Sponge rollers, even more so difficult. Working tables, staging bins, utensils that you've got. Nozzles also would be considered a zone 1 if they're spraying a sanitizer out. General packing equipment and racks. Could even go so far as to do your employees' gloves and hands, although I wouldn't go there at the beginning. What I often like to say is when I'm looking at zone 1 examples and I'm looking for a problem or for areas I think I might have difficulty cleaning and sanitation, anytime I have a transition point between two different types of material is an area I'm going to look at because I know that area is harder to clean. Anytime, so that if I look in this picture in the bottom right-hand corner, and that's a transition point where I'm going from a painted steel um, onto a different surface, or even here between the belt and this hard surface, those harder to clean surfaces really start to come into play. Also, those modifications that you've done on your line where you put in sort of equipment, looking to areas like that would be places I would want to look as I start to look at zone 1. When I look further out, there are areas that are also going to be useful in zones 3 and 4 in your operation where it might be useful to look for data and sort of data you collect perhaps less frequently, but again, sort of on the regular. And that includes things like floors, walls, especially if the walls are compromised in any way, gears, drains, condensate and condensate drip plans, framework of your equipment, anywhere you've got sandwich joints connecting equipment onto the floor, air filters, exposed insulation, right? Wheels of forklifts in particular can be problematic. Hand tools, even cleaning equipment could be swabbed occasionally to make sure that your cleaning equipment isn't part of the problem instead of being part of the solution. Especially if some of it is older. So a bunch of different places to think about looking. And then really places to consider that can be problematic. Any sort of crack or opening with seepage, and we see this across all food operations where you occasionally have a problem pop up. If you've got some sort of seepage coming out of like insulation from a wall, if you've got seepage underneath a mat that might be in your operation, any point where there's seepage of moisture coming out is somewhere you're going to want to consider swabbing. Compromised floor material, is tricky. Of course, this doesn't come into play if you're packing, right? We've got watermelon packers who are on gravel. I'm not going to suggest that they swab the gravel. That's right, just ridiculous. Any place you've got standing water in your facility, any place where that floor and equipment interfaces, again, those temporary repairs, electrical panel interiors, electrical monitor and cooling vanes, even places of dust accumulation. And there's some great stories out of some cereal manufacturing facilities where they had a problem with salmonella in their operation. They cleaned the problem up. They thought they had it completely under control. They took down a wall to expand an area, and all of a sudden that salmonella had been living in dust for decades inside the wall came out and they had a problem again in their operation. So anywhere you've got dust accumulating, especially if it's dust associated with a little bit of product debris, can be a huge issue. And so, yeah, I think I just have some pictures here of some sort of modifications on a line. So somewhere like a screw head would be somewhere you would want to consider, or something like these rivets here on this cabbage line, where there's a potential for moisture seepage out of them. All right, how frequently do you do this? So there is no set frequency. Look once, look twice, and keep looking, right? This is what you're doing to very much make sure that your facility doesn't have an operation or doesn't have a problem. So the frequency really does need to be based on what other information you're getting from other aspects of your environmental monitoring program and your sanitation effectiveness. Also can be driven by an audit scheme. They might say, we want to see you do environmental monitoring and collect a swab quarterly or monthly. So it could be driven by that, but ideally, remember your goal is to be looking for it. So how much is enough? Again, it really depends on what the purpose of your sampling is and what the risk to your product is and what data you have from the other things you're collecting as part of your environmental monitoring program. We do typically recommend to rotate between testing at different sites. So even if you're doing something like just ATP testing and you're doing it after each clean, don't test. Maybe you say, I've got to test the 3 different surfaces and all 3 of them have to pass to move forward with my cleaning. Don't always select the same 3 purposes. Have a rotation of different sites, and then you pick 3 within that set list. And then you've got sort of a rotation of these lists so that you're not always fixating and swabbing the designated areas or the right things. All right. And then again, right, adverse effects should always result in adjustment of frequency. So if you're swabbing at a regular basis and you find a problem, you should increase your frequency until you go back to not having a problem again, and then you can decrease your frequency of doing that again. So frequency examples, again, really are variable depending on where you are in your product. So when you are at the beginning of your product, or beginning of your process with developing an environmental monitoring program, you are going to want to be sampling more frequently, maybe every 1 to 2 months, maybe 2 to 3 data points per site, and maybe even as much as 20 to 30 swabs per week to try to set that up. Now that can be very costly, so maybe you're not able to do that. But once you've sort of set, you would do more sampling at the beginning to understand your baseline and then move into a really more routine monitoring operation. And in this case, GMA, which is a Grocery Manufacturers Association, and back in 2009, recommended 10 to 20 per month. I think that is a recommendation that really is for manufactured foods. I think in produce, if we are seeing 3 to 4 swabs weekly, that's probably the frequency that we want to be looking at, or even if it's 1 or 2 swabs every day for ATP. And then I would say 3 to 4 swabs once a month in environmental monitoring might look like that. But again, you've got to set it up for your operation and really set it up for the size of your operation. So I'm nearing the end, but again, I want to sort of give you this pyramid of everything I've talked about before to sort of wrap it up. Again, these visual inspections here at the bottom are our minimum. We need to get to visibly clean. That needs to be the first thing that we're monitoring. That's our first verification step. Next thing to move into is this ATP, that again, establishing no-go points for our cleaning and sanitation. From there, we can move into that aerobic plate count or total counts. From there, we can move into indicators like coliforms, E. coli, or Listeria species, and then only as is really necessary do we move into pathogen testing in our environmental monitoring. All right, I say this all, we also need records associated with this. We need verification records, and this really gives us our clean break information in our records. And records review actually is also part of verification. So I say that we talked about cleaning and sanitation verification. Do not forget that a record review is also part of a cleaning and sanitation verification, all right? And so you need to make sure that you're doing frequent review of ATP testing and environmental monitoring. You also need to be doing weekly review of all your monitoring logs, your chemical concentrations, and any corrections or corrective actions you've done. And then some sort of an annual review of your master sanitation schedule, written SOP, and training records. Again, all need to be done. And so record review is also a very important part of verification of our cleaning and sanitation programs, and I didn't want to miss that. All right, so important concepts are things I want you guys to walk away with. Verification measures include assuring proper cleaning and sanitation procedures for food contact surface and sanitation programs for food and non-food contact surface. Records review is IE verification activity and also needs to be done. Corrections and corrective actions need to be done timely and include things like recleaning and resanitizing surfaces. And then, of course, training time and correct equipment is essential for your program. And so, Meredith, if it's okay if I take another minute or two, I want to talk about the consequences of what happens when you're not verifying your cleaning or sanitation procedure. I will use Bluebell ice cream as an example of this. But there's a number of examples in the produce industry as well. If you are not verifying your cleaning and sanitation, you can never prove a clean break in your operations. And if you can't prove a clean break in your operations, then if you have a problem and FDA comes into your facility and you can't show them where you had a clean break in cleaning and sanitation, they're going to have you recall all your product back to the point where you can show a clean break in sanitation. We see this in the produce industry frequently, right? And there's a couple of listeria recalls. Really looking at some of the stone fruit ones that happened early on, where you see an operation recalling like a whole season worth of product. Well, Bluebell takes this to an extreme. In this case, in 2015, they found Listeria monocytogenes and an outbreak of Listeria monocytogenes caused by Bluebell ice cream. And Bluebell essentially could never prove that they ever, in the entire operation of their facility, ever had a clean break in sanitation. And so they ended up doing a recall of over 100 years worth of ice cream products. All right. Now, nobody's got 100 years worth of produce sitting around. I hope none of you have 100 years worth of ice cream sitting in your fridge either. But I know that it's not uncommon to have ice cream sitting in your fridge for several years. And so if you are not verifying your cleaning and sanitation programs and you cannot prove a clean break, you do end up in these situations where you can have this really extended recalls. I have slides here that Meredith can share on all the different things that happened. And I would like to say this would never happen again, but we actually just 2 years ago had a very similar situation with Listeria in an ice cream facility out of Florida. And so it happens a lot. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up, and I'm glad to answer any questions that any of you may have now, or feel free to follow up with either Meredith, Wes, or I afterwards.
Oh, I love that picture, Michelle.
Thanks. It's a large pile of dairy solids.
Well, thank you. Do you have any questions for Michelle?
Hi, I do. So I have a question. If we are from Greens to Good, we're based out of New Jersey, but we are a fully nonprofit farm, and part of the reason why we wanted to do this advanced training was really to make sure we're meeting up to the standards and seeing other components we can improve on. For a facility like us that is completely nonprofit, are there any types of grants or programs that make ATP equipment more available when you're really relying on nonprofit budget?
Yeah. So Meredith, I don't know about the things in New Jersey. Do you have cost share options in your block grants or anything like that in New Jersey for cleaning and sanitation?
I'm wondering that we had one program that just closed that we were just asking FSA about if they were going to reopen it again. And I don't know if it is. But Wes and I both have an ATP meter, so we could do that first step where we come up with you and do some swab sampling just to give you an idea. And then you could see the equipment in use and then, Yeah, that's interesting. Wes, do you have thoughts about funding for that? I think that would have fallen in line with the other program, right?
Yeah, we don't have any block grant funds for cost share. That's been an ongoing issue, shall we say.
It might be something that can be worked into a SARE farmer grant, maybe if you.
Oh, that's a good thought.
And I almost wouldn't be shy to call, the reps from Hygiena or Charm and say, look, we're an ATP operation. We'd love, or a nonprofit operation. We'd love to look at adding ATP swabbing. Can you donate, the machine to us, and would you consider a discount? I don't know what sort of things they have as companies, but I wouldn't be shy about asking that. And it might just be
Awesome.
getting it in front of the right person. Yeah.